Warning. The following program contains subject matter that may be disturbing to some audiences. Viewer discretion advised. You're listening to Descent to Depravity, where we investigate the darkest corners of the human psyche, one chilling story at a time. By the time police forced open the door at 99 Fulton Avenue, death had already settled into the walls. It clung to the insulation, soaked into the wood, and crawled beneath the floorboards where human remains were hidden like trash. The house wasn't abandoned. The lights worked, the television was on, and a family lived upstairs. But every room was rotting from the inside out. The odor of decomposition was so powerful that seasoned detectives gagged and stumbled back into the yard for air. Even then, the smell followed them. Neighbors remembered that stench long before bodies were removed. A sickly sweet musk that drifted through open windows in summer nights. Some tried to ignore it. Others called city officials, complaining of garbage stacked too high, insects swarming near the gutters. What they didn't know was that dead women were lying only feet away from the dinner table where the Francois family sat to eat. Beneath the roof, 8 victims were wedged into crawl spaces, shoved into the attic and left in trash piles where rats and insects got to them first. Bones tangled in clothing. Duct tape still clung to hair. The silence of their final moments remained trapped inside the confines of the house. The man responsible didn't flee town. He didn't hide the bodies. He hid them in plain sight. Inside the home he shared with his parents and younger sister. His name was Kendall Francois, a large, quietly violent man whose crimes went unnoticed for nearly 2 years, while prostitutes disappeared one after another from the streets of Poughkeepsie, New York. Women who knew him warned police. Those warnings turned into rumors, and those rumors turned into fear. But fear didn't stop him. Every day, Kendall woke up surrounded by the dead and went about his life, driving his mother to work at a nearby psychiatric center, exchanging casual small talk with co-workers, returning home each night to the stench only he fully understood. Before anyone in authority bothered to believe the women who saw the danger first, 8 lives were taken, and their bodies lay inside a house that slowly became a tomb that waited. Because Kendall Francois was only finished when one of his victims survived and escaped. Before he was the man standing in shackles while 8 families stared him down, Kendall Francois was a quiet boy in a modest New York town, the second of 4 children born to Haitian parents who believed deeply in structure, hard work, and appearances. On paper, their life looked ordinary. They lived in Poughkeepsie, not far from the Hudson River, in a neighborhood where people cut their grass on weekends and kids rode their bikes in the street. It was the kind of place where neighbors might know your last name and what church you attended, but never what was buried inside your home. Inside the Francois household, appearances mattered. His parents had immigrated from Haiti and built their life piece by piece, taking jobs, paying bills, pushing their children toward something better. His mother worked as a nurse at a nearby psychiatric center, spending her days caring for people whose minds had lost their grip on reality. At night she came home to a son whose mind was drifting in a far more dangerous direction, and she never truly saw it. From a young age, Kendall was big, tall, heavy-set, looming over other kids by middle school. His size drew attention, but not the kind that softens a child. Children pointed, laughed, whispered. Teachers noticed his poor hygiene. Students noticed worse. They began calling him Stinky. By the time he reached Arlington High School, his body odor was so overpowering that other students avoided him in hallways and locker rooms. It would become one of the most consistent details people remembered about him for the rest of his life. By high school, he tried to shape that size into something useful. He wrestled. He played football. Coaches encouraged him, saw potential in his strength, his reach, his ability to push other bodies where he wanted them to go. On the field and on the mat, force was a language he could use without being punished for it. There, pain was expected. Conquest was celebrated. But those moments ended when practice was over and he went back to being the strange, smelly kid classmates avoided. He graduated in 1989, and like so many young men drifting at the edge of adulthood with no clear path, he turned to the military. That same year, he enlisted in the United States Army. He was sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma for basic training, where his size became both an asset and a liability. He was strong, but his weight began to climb, over 300 pounds on a 6.4 frame. What the Army saw was not potential, it was a risk. After roughly 4 years of service, he was discharged due to obesity, officially deemed unfit to continue. The Army gave him structure but not a sense of belonging. It taught him how to take orders, how to tolerate discomfort, how to keep going in hostile environments. It did not teach him how to live with other people. It did not teach him empathy, and it certainly did not cure the contempt that had been growing quietly inside him for years. When he came back to Dutchess County, he returned to the same town, the same area, the same underlying sense that he didn't quite fit among normal lives. He enrolled at Dutchess Community College, taking up a liberal arts major, drifting through classes, absorbing lectures while something colder began to form beneath the surface. Professors would later say there was nothing obviously alarming about him in the classroom. He was quiet. He did the work. He passed. On paper, he was just another older student moving through community college. Where his inner life started to slip through was not in college hallways, but in the job he took not long after. A school aide at Arlington Middle School in 1994. First he worked as a part-time custodian, then later as a student monitor between April 1996 and January 1997. It was here that his reputation stopped being just about his smell. To the students, he was stinky. That was the name that followed him up and down the corridors, the nickname whispered, shouted, and weaponized. But underneath that childish cruelty, there was something else. Something the kids recognized on a level adults didn't want to look at too closely. Girls complained that he made them uncomfortable. He would tell them sexual jokes, lean in too close, touch their hair, wrap an arm around them in a way that lasted too long. Some shrugged it off as an awkward, inappropriate staff member who didn't understand boundaries. Others felt a sharper instinct, a warning they didn't yet have the vocabulary for. It was not only his smell that made them recoil. It was what they felt in the space between his body and theirs. The administration didn't respond with alarm. There were no headlines, no public outcry, no lasting record of the unease he caused in the young girls he hovered near. He eventually left the job, telling people he was going to work at Anderson School, a special education institution for children with developmental disabilities in nearby Stottsburg. The school, when later asked, could not confirm that he had ever been hired. There is a particular kind of predator who learns early that he can move through systems without consequence if he keeps everything just a little bit deniable. Kendall was learning that lesson. In high school, his size and smell made him an outsider. In the Army, his weight made him a problem to be removed. At the middle school, his conduct made him an internal issue, something easier to let drift away than confront publicly. Each time he slipped out of focus before anyone drew a hard line and said, "This is dangerous." Meanwhile, he remained in the same small world. The Francois home, the Poughkeepsie streets, the same body that other people avoided, and he dragged through every environment he entered. The house at 99 Fulton Avenue was still his base of operations, a place where his parents believed he was just their troubled, heavy, odd son. They knew the house was messy. They knew the smell was bad. They had explanations ready. Trash, plumbing, clutter. Anything but the reality that their child was rotting on the inside, and soon the house would match him. By the mid-1990s, he had drifted into a pattern of aimlessness that wrapped around something more sinister. Long drives through downtown Poughkeepsie, especially the areas where prostitutes solicited clients near Main Street, Church Street, and the cheaper motels along the Strip. He had money from jobs, from whatever work he picked up, from family support. He had a car. He had size. He had anger. He also had a problem with intimacy. At some point, no one can say exactly when, sex stopped being an attempt to connect and became an arena for control, rage, and experiment. His behavior around the girls at the middle school was an early, smaller echo. Hands on hair, too close. Testing the boundaries between what he could get away with and what people were willing to report. When his employment at the school ended, and his supposed next job never materialized, He didn't rise. He sank. He stayed in the family home, surrounded by clutter, increasingly isolated, descending into a private world that no one else entered fully. He drove his mother to work at the psychiatric hospital. He came back. He wandered the streets looking for women who needed money, who had been bruised by life long before they ever met him. The transition from awkward, inappropriate, smelly aide to serial killer did not happen overnight. It happened in the spaces no one was watching. The car. In the motel rooms. In the moment when his hands went from touching to squeezing and never learned how to stop. By October 1996, when he picked up Wendy Meyers at the Valley Rest Motel, Kendall Francois was no longer just a quiet man with a bad odor and a scattered work history. He was something else entirely. A man who had spent his life absorbing rejection, disgust, and invisibility, and had finally found a way to feel powerful. It is at this moment, with Wendy stepping into his car and expecting a transaction, that his childhood ends, quietly, violently, and forever. The years of being Stinky, the discharged soldier, the off-putting school aide, the overlooked son, all of it collapses into a single decision: to see another human being as something he could use, break, and leave behind in the same house where he slept. And once he crossed that line, there was no going back. October 24th, 1996. That night, the lights of the Valley Rest Motel flickered in the damp air of downtown Poughkeepsie. It was the kind of place where doors closed quietly, not because people were sleeping, but because no one wanted their presence remembered. Wendy Meyers, 30 years old, slight of build, dark hair pulled back from her face, was working the same strip she worked most nights. She was known to police, known to the regulars, and known to danger. Addiction had reshaped her life into short transactions and long disappearances, but she still made calls to her family when she could. Her life was small, but it was still a life. Kendall pulled up in a vehicle that looked ordinary enough, a place for a woman to sit, talk, and get through another night. She recognized him. He wasn't new. His size filled the driver's seat. His smell filled the air. But money was money, and Wendy needed to get through the next 24 hours. So she got in. At some point, the transaction turned into something else. Investigators later pieced together what had happened through Kendall's own admissions, details recounted not with remorse but almost with clinical detachment. They drove back to 99 Fulton Avenue, the place that would become the final address for nearly every woman who encountered him. The house was already suffocating under piles of trash and human filth. Inside that decaying structure, Kendall led Wendy to the bathroom. During sex, his hands closed around her throat. There was no escalation of rage, no argument that triggered the attack. The came suddenly, like an instinct he had been rehearsing internally for years. Wendy struggled, nails scratching skin, body thrashing beneath his weight. But his build had always been his advantage. One he never earned, one he never deserved. When she slipped into unconsciousness, he held on. He never learned how to stop. Investigators believe he drowned her in the bathtub, while her lungs still reflexively tried to breathe. When she died, the body of a 30-year-old woman became, in his mind, a problem to be stored rather than mourned. Kendall dragged her to the attic, the crawl space above where his family slept, ate, argued, and lived their lives without suspecting that death now occupied their home. He left her there in the darkness, tucked near insulation and discarded belongings. There was no burial, no ritual, just disposal. A dehumanizing termination of existence. Forensic pathologists would later confirm what was obvious from the scene: her cause of death, asphyxiation and drowning. There was additional trauma, abrasions consistent with defensive struggle. As far as post-mortem conditions, there were early signs of decomposition accelerated by indoor heat and neglect. While Wendy's body lay overhead, the house continued like nothing had changed. The family went to work. Kendall returned to cruising the streets. Dinner was cooked and eaten beneath the weight of a corpse silently decaying above them. Wendy's absence, like so many women on Main Street, attracted little immediate attention. Her loved ones worried, but police were already overwhelmed with cases of missing hookers. Women's society too often pretends do not exist. In those early days, no one connected her disappearance to the man who still had her skin beneath his fingernails. Less than 5 weeks later, he went hunting again. Gina Barone was 29 years old when she crossed paths with Kendall Francois for the last time on November 29, 1996. She had once been a young woman laughing with friends on better days, but years of addiction had turned the world into a narrow, dangerous place where every choice felt like the only one available. She knew Kendall as a client, a large, awkward man with an odor that clung to him like a warning. But warnings only matter when they are believed, and on that night, she needed the cash more than she needed the fear. Once she stepped into Kendall's vehicle, the doors became barriers instead of protection. The struggle started quickly. She tried to escape, but the size of the man beside her made it impossible. When his hand locked around her throat, the interior of the car filled with her panic. She hit the window with her shoulder as she fought for breath. But Kendall had long since discovered that once a woman lost oxygen, her resistance faded faster than anything else. Gina died in that vehicle, alone, terrified, and still trying to breathe. He drove home in silence with her body slumped beside him. Inside 99 Fulton Avenue, Kendall dragged Gina to the attic where Wendy Meyers had already begun to decay. The attic was a stifling space choked with heat and trash, the air thick enough to feel alive. Gina's body was positioned beside Wendy, as though the victims were being arranged into a morbid catalog only he would ever see. There was no ceremony, no hesitation, only the cruel efficiency of a man who had already made peace with the violence he was capable of. As the days passed, the decomposition of 2 bodies now filled the attic with a sour chemical odor that mixed with mold, garbage, and the humid breath of summer trapped in insulation. Kendall walked downstairs after each kill, as if nothing significant had happened. His mother cooked meals. His sister watched television. They all lived their lives beneath a growing collection of corpses, buried above their heads in a darkness they did not acknowledge. The official investigation into Gina's disappearance would not begin for months. On the streets where she once survived, her absence was noticed only as another person missing, another woman who slipped through society's fingers. Kendall learned something essential. As long as he chose victims no one fought for, he would remain untouchable. Catherine Marsh was 29 years old and pregnant when she got into Kendall's car sometime in early December 1996. She still carried hope inside her bones, hope that she could get clean, hope that she could protect the life growing inside her. She told people she wanted to escape the cycle, but survival and optimism are 2 different things, and survival is always the harder one to hold on to. When she entered 99 Fulton Avenue, the stench was already becoming something that could not be ignored. Piles of garbage crowded the floor. Rotting food clung to kitchen counters. The air felt polluted by decay. Kathy likely hesitated, and that hesitation may have sealed her fate. Kendall attacked her with the same calculated violence he used on the others, strangling her with hands large enough to wrap nearly around her entire neck. She fought violently, leaving marks on his skin that would later be crucial evidence, but she could not overcome the man who outweighed and overpowered her. Her death was not just the end of one life, it was the eradication of 2. The fetal remains found later confirmed that Kathy was carrying a child who never took a breath. Forensic examiners noted injuries that indicated she struggled desperately, trying to protect herself and the baby she hoped would live a better life than she had. Kendall robbed both before the child ever saw daylight. Rather than place her body elsewhere in the home, Kendall added Kathy to the attic, positioning her near Wendy and Gina, forming a row of the dead he could revisit whenever he pleased. Insects swarmed. Skin softened and broke open. Heat accelerated the transformation from person to remains. With every passing day, the attic resembled a mass grave more than a storage space. The smell seeped downward through vents and cracks, drifting into the living areas, a silent demand that the truth be recognized. But inside that house, denial held strong. The Francois family still ate dinner beneath the weight of death. They complained about the odor. They blamed plumbing, garbage, anything except the unimaginable. Kathy was not reported missing until March 7, 1997. Months after her murder. Months too late for anyone searching to find answers. By then, she was already a skeleton in an attic that was slowly filling with the women Poughkeepsie failed to protect. Kendall did not slow down after killing her. He had crossed another threshold. He realized he could destroy mothers, daughters, and unborn children without the world lifting a finger in response. He had learned he could build a graveyard in his childhood home, and no one would see it, even when they walked directly beneath the bodies. Kathleen Ann Hurley was 47 years old when her life intersected fatally with Kendall Francois in early 1997. She had once lived with routine, work, family, a home not far from the river. Addiction gradually stripped those pieces away, leaving her exposed to the dangers that wait on street corners and motel parking lots in Poughkeepsie. Despite the chaos, there were still people who cared about her well-being. There were still hands that would have reached for hers if they had known how close she was to the end. When Kendall pulled alongside her one cold night, he offered what looked like a chance to earn quick money. She accepted because the logic of survival leaves very little room for fear. Kathleen climbed into his car unaware that 3 other women were lying dead inside his home, their bodies decomposing in an attic above the heads of his unsuspecting family. She did not know she was stepping into the grip of a man who had already practiced murder, to the point that it no longer felt extraordinary. The inside of 99 Fulton Avenue was darker now, more dangerous than it had been during his first kills. Decomposition had begun to transform the air into something thick and infectious. Kathleen may have gagged at the smell the moment she entered the home, but any hesitation she had would have been dissolved quickly by Kendall's hands seizing her throat. She fought desperately. Autopsy records would later show severe neck trauma, injuries that proved Kathleen resisted with everything she had left. She kicked, clawed, and strained against his weight, but his size crushed every attempt at escape. The moment her airway collapsed and oxygen stopped reaching her brain, she slipped into unconsciousness. He did not release his grip. He held on until her body went slack and the last signs of life were gone. Then he dragged her through hallways that were no longer hallways at all, just narrow tunnels carved into towering piles of garbage, broken furniture, and rotting refuse. Trash had consumed the house as thoroughly as death had consumed it, and it now swallowed Kathleen as well. Unlike the first 3 victims, Kathleen's remains were not placed in the attic. That space was reaching capacity and was already drowning in the odors of 2 seasons of decay. Instead, Kendall shoved her into the deeper interior of the home, an area where walls were stained and floors disappeared under years of hoarded waste. There, her body began to break down in silence. No one filed a missing persons report at that time. The people who loved her hoped she was somewhere trying to get better. The police saw another woman likely drifting through the system. Kathleen's disappearance passed with barely a ripple, just like the 3 before her. She was already gone, physically, legally, completely, yet no investigation began. No public alerts were issued. No detective traced her last known location to the house where she still lay. Her death was ignored by the world, and Kendall learned once again that the system would not try to stop him. As long as he killed women people looked away from, he would remain invisible. Beneath that roof, 4 women were decaying among the garbage while Kendall continued to eat dinner, sleep in his bed, and walk out onto the street each night in search of the next victim who would not be missed quickly enough. Mary Healey Giaccone was 29 years old when she disappeared in the middle of 1997. She had once lived a life that looked completely different from the one she occupied in the months before her death. There had been stability once, a home, a child, a family who cared deeply. Addiction had gradually eroded those foundations until she found herself wandering through Poughkeepsie's most dangerous neighborhoods, looking for the next high and the few dollars she needed to survive. Even as the drugs stripped her life to bare bone, she still had a daughter who waited for her. She still had a mother and a sister who wondered when she would knock on their door again. They never stopped hoping she would choose recovery over the streets. In their eyes, Mary was not disposable. She was someone worth saving. When Mary encountered Kendall Francois, it would have seemed like just another night exchanging survival for risk. She stepped into his car believing she would step out again. She could not have known that 5 months earlier, 2 other women had stepped into that same car and were now rotting above his family's heads. She could not have known that another woman had died in the house only weeks before. She could not have seen the quiet confidence building in Kendall's eyes, the knowledge that he had killed repeatedly, and not a single person with authority had bothered to look for the missing women properly. Inside the house at 99 Fulton Avenue, Mary would have immediately noticed the same suffocating odor that turned other women's stomachs. The air was thick with decomposition, sweat, and human garbage. Every surface around her was buried under piles of refuse. Flies buzzed and landed on any inch of skin they could reach. She might have asked what the smell was. She might have ignored it. People trapped in addiction often saw worse than what they smelled. But underneath any explanation Kendall might have given, there was a separate instinct, an ancient one buried deep in the brain that whispers danger when the air itself seems wrong. Mary tried to fight when Kendall attacked her. The autopsy would later show bruising, deep neck trauma, and injuries consistent with a struggle for life that did not end quickly. She pushed back, she clawed at him, and she tried to get her feet under her, but Kendall's weight pinned her down with crushing certainty. Her lungs tightened as he cut off her air supply. At some point, those deep instinctual survival responses that push the human body to fight to its last molecule of oxygen were overpowered by a monster who had learned he could squeeze the life out of anyone he wanted. When Mary stopped moving, he finally let go. Kendall dragged her deeper into the house rather than taking her into the attic. That part of the structure had begun to overflow with bodies breaking down in the rising temperatures. Instead, Mary's remains were pushed into another part of the home, where she would vanish into the horde. Staggering mountain of trash bags, old furniture, discarded food containers, stained clothing, and insect activity so severe that crime scene technicians later had to mask their faces to avoid retching. Mary decomposed within that chaos, her identity swallowed by the environment, as swiftly as she had been swallowed by Kendall's hands. Her family filed a missing persons report on November 13, 1997, several months after her murder. By then, there was no trail left, nothing but unanswered fear and law enforcement indifference. They repeated the same phrase they had heard too many times. She'll come home when she's ready. But Mary was already wasting away under a roof where a television played in the evenings and a mother went to work every morning. She was gone, but her killer still walked the streets freely. They tried to describe the man, large, foul-smelling, prone to violence. The man with a house that reeked of death even when the doors were shut. But there was still no body, still no proof, and still no urgency. The warnings continued to build, but no one with power connected the dots. The community of hookers along Main Street felt the shift Mary's disappearance created. Women who used to laugh together on corner blocks now whispered that someone was hunting them. They tried to warn the police. Mary's death underscored the same dark truth that protected Kendall again and again. If society sees a woman as worthless, her killer becomes invisible. Sandra Jean French was 51 years old when she vanished in June of 1998. She had lived through enough heartbreak to fill several lifetimes, but she still called her sister, still checked in, still fought to keep a thin thread connecting her to the world she used to belong to. When she did not reach out for more than a day or two, her family grew worried immediately. Her sister called the police not out of habit, but out of genuine fear. She pleaded with the dispatcher to treat the disappearance seriously, begging that her sister not be dismissed as just another drug addict who had wandered off. This time, someone noticed quickly that something was wrong. Within days, police found Sandra's car abandoned only 3 blocks from the Francois residence. A vehicle left so close to 99 Fulton Avenue should have been the brightest warning sign yet. It was a physical clue placed almost deliberately near the predator's home. A breadcrumb that should have led officers to the front door of the house, where 5 women were already decomposing. The family waited, sick with dread, as police knocked on motel doors and walked alleys, but they never thought to search the place where Sandra's killer lived, ate, and slept. When Kendall applied fatal neck compressions on Sandra inside that hoarder's labyrinth of garbage, rotting food, and decaying flesh, he faced a problem the attic could no longer solve. The bodies stored above had begun to break down rapidly as summer heat poured through the roof. The smell had thickened to an unignorable presence, crawling through ventilation, saturating the drywall, and seeping out into the neighborhood. Kendall dragged Sandra's body into one of the deeper interior spaces of the home, choosing a location where it would sink into the surrounding debris. Her final resting place was among collapsed furniture, mountains of trash, and insects feeding on the layers of decomposition already present. The home had fully transformed into a mausoleum that the living refused to acknowledge. As weeks passed without a trace of Sandra, the street community grew terrified. Women whispered warnings in the dark, telling each other to avoid the large man with dead eyes and a smell that lingered long after he walked away. They had complained to Detective Bill Segrist before, explaining that this same man became violent during intercourse and enjoyed choking them. Some even named him outright. Segrist began to take particular notice of the pattern. For the first time, suspicion tilted toward Kendall Francois. Despite that shift in focus, no one acted quickly enough. Sandra French's family waited for answers, while Kendall returned to his routine, driving his mother to work and cruising the same streets at night. He knew that he had killed another woman who mattered deeply to the people who loved her, and he knew that no one could yet prove it. His confidence grew within the rotting chaos of his home, a place where life and death had begun to coexist, as though both belonged to him alone. Katina Newmaster was 25 years old when she vanished on August 26, 1998. She was a slight woman with brown hair and a nervous smile that flickered only when she felt safe, which was increasingly rare in her final months. She had come to Poughkeepsie searching for stability, but found herself caught in the same cycle that had consumed the lives of so many other vulnerable women on the streets. Despite the chaos surrounding her, she still had friends who noticed when she did not appear for a night or two. Katina was the kind of person people remembered, even when life had taken everything else from her. When she met Kendall on the street that night, she saw what others saw, a large man who made people uneasy without trying. His odor clung to him like a warning, and many workers knew to walk the other way when they saw him trolling Main Street. But desperation is relentless. She stepped into his car believing there would be another night after this one. She did not know that the man beside her had already killed 6 others and was growing bolder by the day. Inside 99 Fulton Avenue, the air was now almost unbreathable. The walls were lined with garbage that had turned into layers of filth sealing off entire rooms. The temperatures in late summer created the perfect breeding ground for the bodies hidden throughout the house. Maggots and blowflies infested the darkest corners, feeding on flesh and thriving in the decay that had become the dominant force inside the home. Katina likely sensed danger the moment she entered. Instinct has a way of screaming when the body recognizes death. Kendall attacked her with the same method that had become routine to him. The struggle was intense. She clawed at him with everything she had, desperate to break free from his grasp. The autopsy would later show deep bruising across her throat, abrasions on her arms, and clear evidence that she fought until her body could no longer keep up with terror. When her resistance slowed and her airway finally collapsed, Kendall did not release his grip. He held on until he was certain nothing inside her would ever rise again. He had learned that murder required patience, and he had become very patient. Katina's body was dragged deeper into the structure of the home, joining the others in a state of decomposition that defied comprehension. She melted into the environment of rot, becoming part of a house that had transformed into a graveyard, while its occupants pretended they did not notice. The smell did not just linger. It poured out from open windows when summer heat forced the air to move. Neighbors complained. The family insisted it was trash, plumbing, anything but human remains filling their home. What happened next set everything in motion. Katina's disappearance was reported immediately. Detectives were already canvassing the area, handing out flyers about missing women, trying to generate leads. They were not yet thinking about Kendall, but his margin for safety was narrowing fast. He did not know it yet, but Katina would be the last woman he killed before his world collapsed. The streets noticed her absence. The women who walked those corners felt the change. Fear finally became louder than denial, and now the police were looking. Kendall did not stop killing because he lost the desire. He stopped because someone escaped. Audrey Pugliese was 34 years old when she entered Kendall Francois's orbit, sometime in the summer of 1998. Unlike most of the other victims, her family did not immediately report her missing. Life had already pushed her into isolation, where phone calls were sporadic and visits home were rare. Addiction had rewritten her identity into something society did not hurry to protect. Audrey moved between couches, shelters, and street corners, surviving day to day as long as she kept moving. That lack of stability, that absence of immediate alarm, would ensure her death remained invisible until everything else came crashing down. When she encountered Kendall, she likely recognized him. He was a familiar threat in a place where threats blended together. The women on the street warned one another about the large man with the nauseating smell and a tendency toward violence during tricks. Audrey may have ignored the warnings or thought she could handle him. She had survived so much already. The danger did not frighten her as much as the fear of withdrawal, of hunger, of having no place to go at all. Kendall offered money and a ride. She accepted. Inside 99 Fulton Avenue, the attic had grown too hazardous even for the killer who created that tomb. The deeper parts of the home were turning into burial chambers where flesh softened, slumped, and melted into whatever surface it lay upon. Audrey would have stood in the doorway and seen only darkness. She would have smelled something so vile that her instincts must have screamed at her to turn around. Before she could escape those instincts, his hands were already around her neck. There is no gentle way to describe what happened next. Audrey fought for her life inside a house built from filth and death. She thrashed against his size, but the struggle only excited him. This was power he couldn't find anywhere else. When the fight slowed and oxygen left her system, she fell unconscious. Kendall continued until he was certain she would never breathe again. Then, like the murderer he had become through practice and repetition, he dragged her through the debris until he found another crevice within the house to consume her. Audrey's body remained hidden in that structure for just over a week before everything unraveled. During the raid on his home, forensic investigators would discover her body before they even realized they were dealing with a serial killer. She was a grim confirmation, the eighth woman who had been killed, stored, and left to rot inside the Francois home. The fact that she had not been reported missing underscored just how many women could have vanished without the world lifting a finger in response. The presence of Audrey's remains confronted law enforcement with a terrible truth. They had only known about 7 missing women. There were actually 8, and it wasn't at all clear whether that was the real number or just the number they had finally found. Her death proved what the house had been screaming for months. Something monstrous was happening in the heart of Poughkeepsie, and no one in power had listened until it was nearly too late. On September 1st, 1998, a woman named Christine Sala stepped into Kendall Francois' car without realizing she had just become the next intended dead woman in a house already drowning under the weight of 8 corpses. She was a local drug user, vulnerable, desperate, and alone. Everything Kendall preyed upon. Like the others, she had heard the warnings whispered across Main Street. But warnings don't keep the cold away at night. Warnings don't pay for another hit. So she entered the vehicle of the man who stank of violence and rot. When Kendall drove her to 99 Fulton Avenue and pulled into the garage, she noticed the same smell that every victim before her had recognized as something far more sinister than garbage. The odor clung to him, to the car, to every breath she took. She told him no when he demanded pleasure. That refusal triggered the exact response she feared: violence. He punched her full force in the face, enough to blur her vision and rattle her bones. He grabbed her by the hair, yanking her out of the vehicle and dragging her across the dirty concrete floor. His hands knew what to do. They encircled her throat and squeezed hard enough that the air in her lungs reversed direction. She heard him say the words countless women had heard before: "I'll end your life." He meant it. Christine's world was shrinking to a tunnel of darkness, oxygen gone, body giving up. But somewhere inside her brain, a primal instinct ignited. As soon as he loosened his grip just slightly to reposition himself, she made the only move that could save her life. She ran. She scrambled back into the car before he fully realized she was no longer pinned under him. She yanked the door shut and forced it open again on the other side. He lunged, but she slipped free of his reach, bare feet pounding asphalt as she bolted away from the house where death was piled in every corner. Kendall got behind the wheel, hunting her down. He drove next to her with his window down, demanding she get in. Her lungs screamed. Her heart hammered out a final warning. She refused. In a split-second decision, she hurled herself from the moving vehicle as he slowed near a Sunoco gas station. She hit pavement hard and rolled, tearing skin and breaking the last illusion of safety. but she was alive and running. Her escape collided with fate. Detectives Skip Manane and Bob McCready were already nearby, canvassing the area with flyers for Katina Newmaster, the woman Kendall had murdered days earlier. A bystander, Deborah Lonsdale, saw Christine staggering and pointed her out as the assaulted woman. The detectives approached Christine, who was shaking, crying, but breathing. She told them everything. They believed her. For the first time, law enforcement did not brush off the fear of a woman from the streets. They did not assume she would vanish and return later on her own. They did not tell her she would be fine by morning. They took her straight to the police station. It was there, under fluorescent lights and the silent pressure of interrogation, that Kendall Francois sat in a chair, calm and composed, speaking to detectives about missing women. He did not know it yet, but the walls of 99 Fulton Avenue were collapsing around him. The truth was spreading from the mouth of the survivor who refused to die. Christine Sala lived through the same terror that killed 8 women before her. The only difference was that she ran fast enough, and now, the monster who had thrived invisibly for 2 years had finally been seen. On September 2, 1998, while Kendall Francois calmly answered police questions, detectives executed a search warrant at his family's home at 99 Fulton Avenue, a place long associated with unexplained stench and complaints. Inside, officers were overwhelmed by the heat and overwhelming odor of decomposition. The home was filled with garbage, human waste, and swarming insects. Within minutes, investigators uncovered human remains, confirming they were dealing with more than a single homicide. As they pushed into the attic, detectives discovered multiple bodies in various stages of decay. 8 confirmed victims who had vanished over nearly 2 years, while the Francois family continued living in the house. Outside, neighbors watched in disbelief, realizing the garbage smell they had questioned for years had been death. At the station, Kendall's composure faded as the search exposed his crimes. He had been killing women and hiding them in plain sight, while a failed system allowed the horror to continue unchecked. He blamed his actions on the women for ripping him off. He later told a reporter that the only thing he regrets is admitting to the police he killed the women, and if he didn't, he wouldn't be in prison. On October 13, 1998, prosecutors formally charged him with 8 counts of first-degree murder, 8 counts of second-degree murder, and 1 count of attempted assault for what he did to Christine Sala. As each charge was read, his face did not change. He sat there like a man listening to a grocery list detached from the horror he caused. To avoid the death penalty, Francois accepted a plea deal where he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. Kendall Francois entered Attica Correctional Facility in 2000. On September 11, 2014, at only 43 years old, Kendall Francois died in the medical unit. The official cause was listed as an AIDS-related illness.